She was just 18 when her father gave her away to a mountain man older than himself. But what she found in that lonely cabin would shake the entire town's soul. It began the morning Ruth Langley turned 18. Her father, Amos, didn't say much over breakfast, just stared into his grits and pushed the eggs around on his plate. Ruth's younger brother, Henry, still too little to understand the weight in the air, chewed noisily on a biscuit. Her mother had died the year prior. There'd been no laughter in the house since. But that morning, silence came with finality, like a door about to close. Amos finally set his fork down and cleared his throat. "You'll pack a bag, just enough for the ride," he said without looking up. Ruth stiffened, her hand freezing over the butter tin. "Ride where?" Amos stood, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "To your husband." The word struck her harder than a whip. "Husband, I don't have." "You do now. Name's Wallace Granger. Lives up past Bitter Peak." Amos finally met her eyes, his own heavy with something between guilt and resolve. He offered 4 mules, a wagon wheel, and seed for spring. We shook hands. Ruth couldn't speak. Her chest rose in shallow bursts. "You traded me." "He's a man of God, keeps to himself. Older, yes, but he'll keep you fed. You'll be safer there than starving here." "But Pa, he's older than you." Her voice cracked. "I don't love him." "This ain't about love." Amos grabbed his hat. "It's about survival." And with that he left the room. Ruth packed as ordered. She did it numb. She wasn't the kind to disobey. Her mother had raised her to be obedient, to honor her father. But honor didn't quiet the storm building inside her. She folded her Sunday dress, a few sewing needles, and the Bible her mother had once read to her from. She kissed Henry's forehead and tried not to cry when he asked if she was coming back. By mid-morning, Amos was loading the wagon with seed sacks, one of the mules already tied to the back. Ruth climbed up beside him, the leather seat burning under the sun. "Don't look back," Amos muttered. She did anyway. They reached Bitter Peak by sundown. The mountain loomed like a shadow that swallowed the horizon. Forest thickened, trail narrowed, and the air turned colder. Amos said little, except to grunt directions. Then at a bend in the path a cabin emerged. Sturdy, stone chimney, smoke rising. Beside it stood a man, not young, not friendly, watching them approach. Ruth's stomach dropped. Wallace Granger looked like he belonged to the mountain. Broad shoulders, heavy beard, weathered skin browned by sun and snow. He didn't smile. He didn't step forward. He waited like a man who'd seen too much or stopped expecting anything at all. Amos climbed down first. "Wallace," he said, tipping his hat. "Amos?" Wallace's voice was deep, slow. He glanced at Ruth, then looked away. "She got a name." "Ruth." Wallace nodded once. "Come." It wasn't a command, not exactly, but Ruth felt the chill of it. She climbed down, her knees weak. The cabin door creaked as he opened it, revealing a dark interior, lit only by the fire and a single oil lamp. Amos didn't enter. "I'll leave her to you," he said. "We made a deal." Wallace nodded. No handshake, no goodbye. Amos turned, mounted the wagon, and drove away without looking back. The cabin was silent except for the crackle of flame. Ruth stood by the threshold, her bag clutched tight. Wallace moved to the table, poured a mug of something from a pot. "You eat." She shook her head. He slid the mug toward her. "Sit." She did slowly. Her hands trembled. "You'll sleep in the back," he said, motioning toward a curtain. "You cook." "Yes, sir." "I hunt, I trap, you clean, you mend. Don't touch the ledgers, don't go near the trap shed, don't ask questions." Ruth looked up at him, confused. "Ledgers?" He stared. "I keep track of things, that's my business." She nodded. That night she lay awake on a straw mattress in the back room, heart pounding. No wedding, no vows, just a man older than her father sitting silently by the fire outside her curtain. The mountain wind howled. She didn't cry, not yet. She waited. 3 days passed like fog. Wallace left before dawn, returned near dusk, ate what she made, said little. He never touched her, never crossed the curtain line. But Ruth sensed something behind his silence. Not kindness, not threat, something else. The cabin had a second room, door always locked. She once heard scratching from within like something alive. But when she asked, Wallace only said, "That room's not for you." One morning she woke to find a rabbit skinned on the table. No blood trail, no footprints, just the carcass and a folded cloth beside it. Another morning she found Wallace staring out the window, rifle in hand, though there was no one out there. "You expecting someone?" she asked. He didn't answer. That afternoon a rider passed by. Young man, brown vest, clean face. He slowed near the cabin, glanced inside, saw Ruth through the window. The next morning, Wallace nailed a board over the front window. Days bled into each other. Ruth kept the cabin neat. She spoke aloud sometimes just to hear her own voice. Wallace never answered. Until one night when he came in limping, blood on his sleeve. She rushed to him. "You're hurt, what happened?" Wallace brushed past. "Don't ask questions." "But your arm." He turned, eyes dark. "I said don't." Then he locked the trapdoor behind him. Ruth stood there, hands trembling. She knew then this mountain held more than snow and silence. It held secrets, and she was now part of them. That night she didn't sleep. The next morning the front door stood wide open. Wallace was gone. But muddy footprints led not out, but in. And beside the hearth, a child's doll sat, soaking wet. Ruth dropped her broom. She hadn't brought a doll. No one had come to the cabin. But the doll sat there, waiting. The doll was old, one button eye missing, the other hanging by a thread. Its dress was torn, soaked as if it had been left in a creek, and its yarn hair stuck in stringy wet clumps across its stitched forehead. Ruth stood motionless, her breath caught, heart climbing up her throat. The doll hadn't been there the night before. She was sure. She had swept that very spot. She glanced toward the door again, wide open, wind pushing in pine scent and a low fog that drifted like smoke across the cabin floor. Ruth stepped forward cautiously, not touching the doll, just crouching beside it. Her eyes darted to the footprints again. They led straight in, bare feet, small, a child's. But they weren't hers. They were Wallace's either. She straightened slowly and closed the door, bolting it with the iron latch. Then she stared at the footprints again, heart hammering in her ears. Was someone still inside? "Wallace," she called, not loudly. The fire had long gone cold. The lantern beside the door flickered, its oil low. "Are you here?" No answer. She moved through the cabin with caution now, her steps silent over the wooden floor. She pushed aside the curtain to the small back room, peeked inside, empty. She checked the root cellar trapdoor, still latched. Then she stood before the locked door Wallace had forbidden her to touch. The footprints, they led here, straight to this door, then vanished. She pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then a faint sound, a scrape, then nothing. She stepped back quickly, breath quickening. Whatever game this was, it had begun long before she arrived. Wallace had secrets. And the mountain, it had layers of silence she hadn't yet learned to understand. She waited until noon. Wallace didn't return. By evening, worry began to eat through her caution. What if he was hurt? What if that limp last night had worsened, and he'd collapsed somewhere out in the snow? Ruth bundled herself in the spare cloak that hung on the wall and opened the cabin door. Snow had begun to fall again, light, whispering flakes that melted on her cheeks. She followed the trail Wallace often took toward the woods. Her boots crunched softly as she walked, trees towering like silent watchers above. For the first time she noticed how alone she truly was, not just away from town, but swallowed by wilderness, by cold, by mystery. Half an hour in, she saw the blood. Drops, then smears. on the bark of a pine, then against a flat rock, then a smear across snow like someone had fallen. She rushed forward, hands trembling. "Wallace," she called out, "it's Ruth, where are you?" No answer, just wind and birds. Then she saw it, something dark ahead. A man's shape slumped beside a log, one hand clutching his thigh. Wallace. "Thank God," she breathed, racing to him. "What happened?" "Quiet," he hissed, his face pale. "You shouldn't be out here. You're bleeding." "It's not mine," he muttered. She froze. "What?" He gritted his teeth and tried to rise. "Help me stand." Ruth reached under his arm, helped lift him. His body was heavy, muscles like stone. She felt the tension in him, the urgency. He leaned heavily on her, breathing hard. "You're sure it's not your blood?" "I said quiet." They moved slowly through the trees, Ruth stealing glances at the bushes, the rocks, the shadows. She kept seeing that doll in her mind, how it sat there, wet and waiting as if placed with care, by a hand too small to be his. Back at the cabin, Wallace collapsed into his chair. Ruth closed the door, locked it tight, and lit the lantern. The doll was still there by the hearth, exactly where she'd left it. She gestured toward it. "That was that here before." Wallace's eyes darkened. He didn't answer. "Wallace," she said, voice firmer. "That doll, it wasn't mine. You didn't bring it. There were footprints, little ones, and they stopped at the locked room." "Don't go near that door," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Not ever." She stared at him. "Why not?" "Because I said." "That's not an answer." He stood slowly, limping, and took a step toward her. "You want to stay alive in this place, Ruth. You stop asking questions about things you don't understand." She didn't flinch. "I want to understand." Wallace clenched his jaw. Then, surprisingly, he stepped back, sat down, rubbed his temples like a man haunted. After a long silence, he spoke. "She was 5. Her name was Wren." Ruth blinked. "Who?" "My daughter." The word struck her still. "I thought you lived alone." "I do now." He looked toward the fire. "She went missing 3 winters ago. Snowstorm came early. I was out hunting. When I got back, the door was open. She was gone, no footprints in or out, just the doll, soaked, sitting just like that." Ruth's blood ran cold. "I searched the mountain for days, weeks, every inch, nothing." I'm so sorry," she whispered. Wallace stared at the doll like it was a ghost. "Sometimes it comes back. The doll, never in the same place, once in the woods, once by the creek, now here." "You think she's trying to tell you something?" He didn't answer. Ruth knelt by the doll again, heart aching. "Do you think she's still alive?" "She's dead," he said. "You don't know that. She vanished into the mountain, and the mountain, it keeps what it takes." The next few days passed in a fog. Ruth couldn't shake the image of the doll, or the tiny prints that stopped at the locked door. She heard things now, soft knocking at night, rustling in the attic, creaks that weren't from wind or wood. She asked Wallace again what was behind that door. He refused to speak. So one afternoon, when he was out gathering wood, she found the key hanging behind the mantel. She knew it was wrong. She knew he'd told her not to. But the curiosity had become too loud, too heavy. She unlocked the door. The room was small. Dust hung in the air like mist. There were shelves stacked with books, jars of herbs, dried leaves, and bones. Small bones, wrapped in cloth, some cleaned, some not. She gasped, stepping back. And then she saw it, a row of journals, thick and leather-bound. The first one was labeled simply, Wren. She opened it. Inside, Wallace's handwriting, pages and pages, every day since her disappearance. Notes, dreams, drawings, theories, prayers, maps of the woods, sketches of the doll, and something else. Symbols. Circles with crosses, trees with eyes, mountain shapes with words scrawled beneath in a language she couldn't understand. She flipped through faster, panic rising. One entry stopped her cold. If the mountain has taken her, then I must give it something back. Life for life, blood for blood. The dream said she waits but won't cross until the weight is balanced. Ruth's stomach twisted. Suddenly behind her, the door slammed shut. She turned. Wallace stood there, his face pale, jaw tight. I told you not to come in here. She stepped back. What are you doing, Wallace? What is all this? He looked at the bones, then at the journal in her hand. My penance. You think you can bring her back? I don't think. His voice was hollow. I know. Ruth shook her head. That's madness. She's gone. But if there's still hope, you don't bring her back by sacrificing others. I haven't harmed anyone, he snapped. Not yet. She froze. Yet. He stepped forward. But the mountain wants balance. It speaks, in dreams, in wind. You don't hear it, but I do. Wallace, listen to yourself. You need help. I need my daughter. Ruth backed into the wall, hands trembling. You brought me here. For what? To be a wife or a trade? Wallace didn't answer. He stared at her with eyes that had once been tired, but now burned with fever. Ruth, he said quietly, go back to your room and pray. She didn't move. I said go. She turned and fled, locking herself behind the curtain that night. She pushed a chair under the handle and sat with her back to the door, Bible clutched to her chest. Outside, the wind howled louder than before. And somewhere beneath it all, she thought she heard a child crying. Ruth didn't sleep that night, not even for a moment. She sat with her back pressed against the doorframe, arms wrapped around her legs and the Bible open on her lap, though her eyes never settled on the words. Every creak in the floorboards, every moan of wind through the logs jolted her like a slap. But the worst sound, the one that nearly shattered her heart, came just before dawn. A knock. Soft, delicate, at the very edge of the cabin's back wall near the locked door. 3 gentle taps. Then silence. Ruth's breath stopped. She didn't move, didn't blink. The knocking didn't come again, but the air in the cabin shifted, heavier somehow, like someone had entered, though the door remained shut tight. She didn't dare go out until the first gray light of morning touched the window. When she stepped beyond the curtain, Wallace wasn't there. His bedroll was untouched, his coat still hung by the door. The cabin felt abandoned. But the doll had moved again. It now sat in the center of the table, upright, propped carefully as if by invisible hands. A string of tiny pine cones, threaded with what looked like red thread, was wrapped around its middle like a sash. And beneath it, a folded scrap of paper. Ruth's fingers trembled as she opened it. In delicate, looping child's handwriting. I'm cold. She nearly dropped it. She spun toward the window. The forest beyond looked the same. No footprints, no shapes, just pines and snow and stillness. Her instincts screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Bitter Peak was 3 days' ride from the nearest town, and she didn't know the trails. Even if she tried to escape, she had no mule, no weapon, no guide. And Wallace, she didn't know if she feared him more than the mountain itself. Later that morning, she gathered her courage and opened the door. No Wallace. No footprints. No dial either. It was gone along with the note. The silence of the day was unnatural. Birds didn't call. Wind didn't stir. Even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Ruth spent the hours pacing, reading from the Bible, watching the woods. Her mind replayed every word Wallace had spoken, about Wren, about the mountain, about blood and balance. What had he meant? Had he brought her here as some kind of offering, or was he only spiraling deeper into madness? By late afternoon he returned, but not through the front door. She heard a thud behind the cabin, then footsteps on the roof. A moment later, Wallace climbed down the side like a man used to living in high, dangerous places. His shirt was torn, his face streaked with ash, and in his arms he carried a deer. No parts of one. Blood dripped from the carcass as he slung it onto the chopping block outside. Ruth rushed to the door. "Wallace, where have you been?" He didn't answer. "Wallace, something happened here. The doll moved. There was a note." "I know." She froze. "What do you mean, you know?" He looked up slowly, eyes tired. "Because she comes to me too, when I sleep." He paused. "When I let her." Ruth's stomach turned. "Are you saying you invite this?" "She's lost, she's cold, she wants to come home." "She's gone, Wallace, you said it yourself." "I said the mountain keeps what it takes." He looked her dead in the eyes. "But it doesn't always mean forever." She stepped back. "You said you hadn't harmed anyone, but the journals, those bones, what are you doing?" "I hunt, I trap." His voice was flat. "Some of what I find is old, not all of it mine. The mountain's littered with death. It keeps the dead like it keeps secrets." "That's not an answer." He turned away, carving into the deer with practiced hands. The sound of blade through flesh made Ruth flinch. That night the dreams came to her too. She saw a girl barefoot in the snow wearing a white dress soaked with water. Her hair matted, her lips blue, but her eyes were sharp, aware, watching. In the dream, Wren stood at the foot of Ruth's bed, holding out the doll. Her voice was a whisper, but it echoed like thunder in Ruth's chest. "You took my place." Ruth sat bolt upright, heart slamming against her ribs. The room was dark, the fire had died. And at the foot of her bed, real solid, not imagined. "The doll!" She screamed. Wallace burst through the curtain, rifle raised. "What is it?" She pointed, mouth wide but words broken. The doll stared back at them both, unmoving. He lowered the rifle slowly. "It's her." "Wallace, this is not normal. This is not natural." "I know." "She's angry." "I know that too." He knelt beside the doll, his fingers brushing it gently. "This time she spoke to me." Ruth's breath hitched. "What did she say?" Wallace's hands trembled. "She wants me to bring her back, but it's not working. The dreams, they're different now, demanding." Ruth's voice was hoarse. "She said I took her place." Wallace looked up. "Then she's angry with me." "No," Ruth said, backing away. "She's angry with me." The next morning, Ruth packed a satchel. She wasn't staying. She didn't care if she froze in the woods. Anything was better than being in that cabin one more night. Wallace watched her from the doorway. "You won't make it." "I'll take my chances." "There's something you don't understand." "I understand enough. You're letting something dark grow here, and it's using your daughter's memory to twist you." He stepped aside. "Go then." Ruth hesitated, surprised. "No warning, no threats." "No." She walked past him, heart pounding. She reached the edge of the trail before looking back. He hadn't moved. The woods closed around her like a mouth. She walked for hours. Snow deepened, wind howled. Her fingers went numb, her cheeks raw, but she didn't stop. Until the sun fell and the trail vanished. She was lost. She tried doubling back. Trees looked the same. Shadows lengthened, cold chewed into her bones. And then she saw the light. A lantern, swinging gently through the trees ahead. "Hello," she called, desperate. The light stopped. Then turned. And vanished. She ran after it, stumbling through snow and roots, branches clawing at her face. She burst into a clearing. Empty. No lantern. But something else. A shallow grave. Freshly dug. And beside it, a coat, hers. Folded neatly. Her knees gave out. The snow whispered behind her. She turned. And a small girl stood there. White dress, blue lips, doll in hand. Go home, Wren whispered, then disappeared. Ruth screamed. She fled through the trees blindly until her legs gave out and darkness swallowed her. When she opened her eyes, she was back. Back in the cabin. Wallace sat beside the bed, eyes hollow, holding a steaming mug. How? I found you. You collapsed near the North Ridge. I saw her. He nodded. I know. She warned me. Wallace closed his eyes. She's not what she was. You mean she's evil? He shook his head. No, but she's been out there too long. Cold changes things. Ruth sat up, pulling the blanket tighter. Wallace, what are you planning? His voice was quiet. I'm going to the summit tomorrow night. The summit. There's a place, high above the ravine. Locals say it's where the mountain breathes. She blinked. What does that even mean? I don't know, but that's where I see her clearest, where the dreams become loud. And you think if you go there, she'll come back. Wallace, please, don't. If you give her whatever she's asking for, you might lose more than yourself. He didn't reply. He stood, walked toward the fire, and placed the doll into the flames. Ruth gasped, What are you doing? Testing her. The fire swallowed the doll in seconds. The room filled with the stench of scorched cloth and yarn. The flame hissed and bucked. Then, the fire went out. Just like that, dead. And in the ashes, untouched. The doll. Perfect. Whole. Wallace fell to his knees. She's stronger now. Ruth backed away in horror. The mountain had claimed his mind. And soon it might take his soul. The doll did not burn. Ruth stared at the hearth as the fire that should have devoured it lay blackened and cold. The charred logs smoked lightly, as if ashamed, as if they too had seen something they shouldn't have. But there in the center, where flame had licked and snapped a moment before, the doll sat upright, its button eye now reattached, its sash of pine cones gone, replaced with a ribbon of red cloth tied neatly around its waist. Wallace did not move. He was still on his knees, hands trembling, lips moving soundlessly. Ruth stood frozen at the threshold to the curtain, her body half wrapped in the woolen blanket from the bed, the Bible clutched so hard in her hands her knuckles had turned white. Wallace, she whispered. He didn't answer. Wallace. He blinked, then slowly turned toward her. His face looked older somehow, creased by fear, slack with awe. She's here, he said. I know, Ruth breathed. He stood, hands hanging at his sides. I've seen her in dreams, but I never thought, never believed she could come through like this. She's not your daughter anymore, Ruth said, her voice trembling. You said it yourself, cold changes things. Wallace shook his head. No, she's still Wren, she's just waiting for me to understand. Understand what? He looked toward the ceiling. That I didn't pay enough, that grief alone wasn't enough, that losing her wasn't enough. Ruth's chest tightened. What are you talking about? He turned back to her, eyes hollow. She doesn't want me to bring her back. She does. She wants me to come to her. Ruth stepped backward slowly. Wallace. I saw it, he whispered. In the fire in the dream, I saw the summit. I saw her arms open and snow swirling around her. I saw the doll burning, but she stood untouched. And she said. He stopped, swallowed. She said, you left me, now you stay. Ruth didn't move. She's not calling me to rescue her, Ruth. She's calling me to trade. He looked up, as if only now realizing it. And I'm going. Ruth's voice dropped into desperation. You can't do that. I have to, she's waiting. She's gone. And whatever is out there, Wallace, it's not a child anymore. It's not Wren, it's something else. Something cruel, it knows your heart. It knows how to break you. Wallace stared at her. Then said, that's what grief is. He walked past her, brushing her shoulder. His hands were steady now, like a man who had found purpose. She turned after him. "Wallace, don't go up there. You said yourself it's where the mountain breathes. Don't you hear what that sounds like? Breath means life, and not all life is holy." He paused at the door, gripping his coat from the hook. "Stay inside," he said. "Don't follow." Then he opened the door and stepped into the dark. And he did not look back. Ruth sat by the hearth until the fire revived itself. She didn't add wood. She didn't strike a match. The flames simply returned, as if the cabin itself had decided to breathe again. The doll remained where it sat, now on the mantel, somehow moved, its arms lifted slightly in what could have been a child's game of praise or a beckoning wave. She couldn't sit there any longer. She grabbed Wallace's old journal, the one labeled Wren, and flipped through the entries again. This time she read deeper, skimmed less, searched for any mention of the summit, any sign of what might happen if he reached it. Midway through the book, the handwriting shifted, became uneven, jagged, like it was written during a storm. One passage stood out. "The wind at the summit whispers like her voice. The snow spirals in patterns I've only seen in her drawings. Last night the fire refused to light. I took it as a sign. She's growing stronger. She wants me near. I think I'll go." That entry had been dated a year ago. A year. Ruth flipped ahead. There were no entries for months afterward. Then, abruptly, one sentence written in ink so faint it was almost unreadable. She said she would wait one more winter. Ruth slammed the journal shut and stood. She grabbed her cloak and boots. If Wallace thought he could offer himself to the mountain and vanish into some ghostly reunion, he was wrong. She would not let grief swallow another soul. Not tonight. The climb was brutal. Snow whipped her face in wild swirls. The trail was almost invisible. Branches clawed at her arms, and rocks slick with ice nearly took her ankles. The air grew thinner the higher she climbed, her breath burning her lungs, but she didn't stop. She followed his boot prints. And halfway up the slope, she found something in the snow. A ribbon. Red. Tied like a gift, fluttering from a tree branch. She snatched it down and stared. It was the same ribbon that had been tied around the doll. The wind howled louder, the sky bruised into night. She pressed on. Just as the world began to turn to pure white and shadows, she crested the summit ridge. There in the snow, Wallace, standing, arms raised. Before him stood a shape. Small. Wren. She wore the same white dress. Her hair was clean now. Her hands were bare. She smiled up at him, eyes wide with joy. "Papa," she whispered. Ruth stopped, heart clenched. "Wallace, don't." He turned, startled. "Ruth, no, you shouldn't be here. She's not real. She's right here." But Wren's face darkened at the sound of Ruth's voice. Her smile vanished, and her arms dropped. The air shifted. Suddenly the wind screamed through the trees, and Wren's form shimmered, as if she were a reflection on water. She looked at Ruth now, eyes narrowing. "You don't belong," she said. Wallace stepped in front of her. "She's not here for you, she came for me." Ruth stepped forward. "No, she's not here for anyone. She's a shadow, Wallace, a memory wrapped in snow. You're seeing what the mountain wants you to see." Wren blinked slowly. "She said you would say that," she whispered. "Who?" Ruth felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The wind stopped. Silence pressed in. Then behind Wren, the mountain opened. Not literally, not with stone or cracking earth, but with presence. The trees leaned back, the sky bent low, and Ruth felt it as something behind Wren, vast, watching. The wind began again, but this time it sang. Sang in a voice like a mother's lullaby, and a funeral dirge in one. And then came the whisper. "Bring her." Wallace staggered. Wren held out her hand. I'm not enough, he whispered, eyes wide. She wants both of us. No, Ruth said. He turned to her. She said, balance. No. But Wallace lunged forward, not at Wren. At Ruth. She barely dodged him, slipping on the ice, crashing down. His hands missed her throat by inches. Wallace, stop. I have to, she promised me peace. She's lying. He lunged again, and this time his hands caught her cloak. She kicked backward, scrambling to her feet. Blood poured from a gash on her palm where she had landed. Her blood hit the snow. Wren's head snapped toward it. And she smiled. She took a step toward Ruth. Wallace gasped, she's coming. No. Ruth turned, running through the trees, back toward the trail. She heard footsteps behind her. Not his. Not hers. Smaller. And laughing. She didn't stop. She tore through brush and rock, stumbled and ran, until the cabin's roof appeared through the trees. She flung the door open, slammed it behind her, bolted it shut. Then collapsed. Silence. Only her heartbeat filled her ears. Until a knock. Soft. From the other side of the door. Then a voice. Mama. Ruth's breath froze. She stepped backward slowly. The knock came again. I'm cold. She turned and fled to the back room, slammed the curtain shut, pushed the chair against the door. Her body trembled uncontrollably. And then she remembered. The doll. It was gone. And in its place, a pair of tiny bare footprints leading straight to the bed. The footprints were impossibly small, pressed into the wood as if snow had melted there only seconds ago, each one no bigger than Ruth's palm. They led from the hearth to the edge of the bed where she sat trembling, the blanket still clenched to her chest. She stared at them, unblinking, every muscle in her body turned to stone. She dared a glance behind her. The curtain swayed gently, though there was no draft. The chair she'd pushed under the handle rattled once as if nudged from the other side. Wallace, she whispered, though she knew it wasn't him. The reply came not from the door but from the shadows beside the bed, high, sing-song, like a child echoing in a hollow cave. Cold. Ruth's heart seized. Her eyes darted to the dark corner. Nothing there. Just the faint glow of dying embers through the crack at the base of the curtain. She tightened her grip on the Bible. Show yourself, she whispered, her voice cracking. Silence. She slid off the bed slowly, her bare feet brushing against the cold floor. She followed the tiny footprints backward, step by trembling step, until she reached the hearth again. The doll was no longer on the mantel. The mantel itself looked empty, stripped of everything but ash. Then she noticed something else. The locked door to Wallace's forbidden room stood wide open. Her stomach dropped. The footprints led inside. She stared at the yawning doorway. For days she had fought herself not to look deeper, not to know. But now it was open and calling her like the mouth of some sleeping animal. She could smell something faint beyond, pine and wet stone, like the air outside just before snow. Wren, she whispered. No answer. She stepped inside. The room looked different than it had when she'd first unlocked it. The shelves were bare now, journals gone, bones gone. The small window high on the wall was rimmed in frost. In the center of the floor, where the journals had been stacked, a circle of ash had been drawn, dark and precise. Inside the circle lay the doll, face up, button eyes glinting in the dim light. Its arms were spread like a cross. And around the circle, words had been carved into the wood, deep, jagged letters she didn't recognize. They pulsed faintly as though written in ember rather than ink. Ruth's breath came fast. She backed away from the circle, heart hammering, when a low sound rose from beneath the floor. A hum. It vibrated up through her feet, rattling the boards. The air in the room grew colder, thicker, as if water had flooded invisible around her knees. Then a small voice rose within the hum. "You don't belong." Ruth spun, but no one stood behind her. "You took my place," the voice said again. "I didn't," Ruth gasped. "I didn't take anything." "You're warm," it whispered. "I'm cold." Ruth clutched the Bible to her chest. "Then come home, come back to God, stop this." The hum deepened. "I can't." Ruth's vision blurred as a shape began to form in the far corner. First a shimmer, then a child's outline, then the pale dress, blue lips, dripping hair. Wren's face was almost tender, but her eyes glowed faintly, not with life but with something older. "You shouldn't have come here," Wren whispered. "I had no choice," Ruth said, trembling but steadying her voice. "Your father, he brought me, but I won't let this mountain have me too." Wren tilted her head. "It already does." Ruth stepped back until her heel caught the threshold. She stumbled out of the room, slammed the door, and pressed her back to it. Her heart pounded so loudly she almost missed the sound outside, footsteps crunching snow, slow, heavy. "Wallace." She bolted the main door, ran to the window, and peered out. Through the swirling snow she saw him trudging toward the cabin, coat torn, hair matted with frost. He wasn't alone. Behind him walked the girl. No footsteps, no shadow, but there she was, trailing him like a silent echo. Her dress barely touched the snow. Ruth's breath fogged the glass. Wallace reached the door and pounded once. "Ruth, open up." She hesitated. "Ruth." She unlocked the door but did not step aside. "Where have you been?" she demanded. He looked at her strangely. "I told you the summit. You shouldn't have followed me." "I saw her," Ruth whispered. Wallace's eyes flicked over her shoulder toward the locked room. "Did she come inside?" Ruth's voice cracked. "What is she, Wallace?" He stepped into the cabin and shut the door behind him. Snow clung to his beard, his hands, but his eyes burned bright. "She's my daughter." "No," Ruth shook her head. "She's something using your daughter's face. Something that wants to take you and me and anything else it can." "She's lost." His voice was soft, almost pleading. "She just wants to come home." "Home isn't here anymore," Ruth said, her tone sharpening. "Home's gone. Your grief built this thing, and now it wants to finish what it started." Wallace moved closer. "You don't understand," she spoke tonight. She said, "There's still a way." "A way for what?" "For all of us." Ruth's stomach twisted. "What did you promise her, Wallace?" He lowered his eyes. "A life for a life, warmth for cold, balance." "You think that's mercy?" Ruth snapped. "That's a lie." He looked up sharply. "Don't call my daughter a liar." "She's not your daughter." Wallace's hand shot out and caught her arm, but his grip trembled. His eyes filled with tears even as his jaw set like stone. "Let go of me," Ruth said quietly. He released her. His shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I can't lose her again." Ruth's voice softened. "You already did. Don't let her take you too." Silence stretched between them. Only the crackling of the rekindled fire filled the cabin. Then from the locked room, the doll's voice spoke. "Papa." Both of them froze. It came again, clearer this time. "Papa." Wallace's head snapped toward the door. His lips trembled. "Wren." Ruth grabbed his arm. "Don't." "She's calling me." "No, she's calling you in." But he was already moving. He reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. Ruth followed, heart pounding. The room had changed again. The circle of ash was now a pool of water, black and still, its surface rippling though no breeze moved. Above it hung branches thick with frost though no tree grew here, and in the center stood Wren, holding out the doll. "Papa," she whispered. Wallace's voice broke. "Wren." He stepped into the circle. The water rippled around his boots. "No," Ruth cried, lunging after him. But as soon as she touched the edge of the circle, a blast of cold hurled her backward into the wall. She gasped, breath stolen, vision flashing white. Wallace knelt before the child. "I'm here." Wren's face flickered between tender and terrible, a child and a shadow all at once. "Stay," she whispered. "Be warm." Wallace's tears froze on his cheeks. "I'll stay." She held out the doll. He took it in both hands. The water surged upward like a living thing, wrapping them both in black ice. "Wallace!" Ruth screamed. The floorboards split. The walls groaned. Snow gusted through cracks in the logs, though no window had opened. The air smelled of pine and blood. And then silence. The circle was empty, the water gone, the ash gone, the frost gone. Only Ruth remained, crumpled against the wall, staring at the space where Wallace had been. The room was just a room again, bare floor, bare shelves, cold and still. No Wren, no doll, no Wallace. Ruth crawled to the center, hands shaking. "Wallace," she whispered. No answer. She pressed her palm to the floor where the water had been. The wood was warm. Then a child's voice whispered in her ear, though no one stood near. "Now you're alone." Ruth spun, eyes wild. "Show yourself." Silence. She stumbled out of the room, slammed the door and leaned against it, gasping for air. She was alone in the cabin. Completely alone. Or so she thought, until she turned and saw, on the table by the fire, a single folded scrap of paper. Her name written on the outside in delicate, looping handwriting. Inside, one line: "Bring me my mother." The cabin felt hollow after that note, like a coffin built too large for the body it held. Ruth sat at the table, the paper trembling in her hands, the fire casting long, nervous shadows across the floor. She read the words over and over again. "Bring me my mother." It wasn't signed, but there was no need. The handwriting was the same as on the last note, looping, elegant, childish. But the ink looked wrong. It shimmered red when the firelight hit it, not like paint or pen, but like something drawn from a wound. She looked toward the locked room, no longer locked, now just a darkened portal, and imagined Wallace in there, his knees in the ash, his arms outstretched to something wearing his daughter's face. Gone, consumed. And now it wanted more. It wanted her. A slow, terrible realization crept into Ruth's chest. The mountain hadn't chosen Wallace, it had tolerated him, used him, but it had waited for her. She was the one alive, warm, young. She was the one it had been promised. Wallace had just been the vessel of delivery. The offering. She clutched the Bible tighter. "You'll have to fight harder than that," she whispered into the room. The cabin answered with silence. But something moved. Not loud, not obvious. A creak upstairs, soft and long like the stretching of old wood under new weight. She stood. The only way up was the narrow ladder beside the fireplace, leading to a loft Wallace had rarely spoken of. She had assumed it was empty, maybe a place for storage. But now. Another creak. She moved slowly to the ladder, keeping her eyes on the ceiling above. The air grew colder the higher she climbed, though the heat of the fire licked at her back. At the top she paused. The loft was narrow, barely enough room to crouch. One small window let in the moonlight, and beside it, a crib. Ruth's heart seized. The crib was handmade, rough pine, empty. Except for the doll. It lay there, swaddled in a blue blanket too fine for Wallace's simple tastes, its button eyes facing up. Its red ribbon had been replaced by a strand of blonde hair braided around its middle. And next to the crib, scrawled on the floor in charcoal, a message. "You'll be a better mama than the first." Ruth covered her mouth. Something deep inside her snapped, rage, sorrow, terror, all twisted together. This wasn't just a haunting, it was grooming. This thing wasn't seeking vengeance. It was building a family, a replacement. And it wanted her to play the role. The entire cabin, the journals, the care Wallace had shown, none of it had been random. It was preparation. She descended the ladder and packed. Boots, gloves, coat, bread, the remaining lamp oil, a knife from the kitchen, and the Bible. She threw it all into Wallace's old game sack and slung it over her shoulder. The door moaned as she opened it. The wind outside stung her cheeks instantly. Snow fell heavy now, a thick curtain, but she pushed forward into it. She wasn't going to wait around to be chosen. She would run. The first hour was nothing but trees and darkness. Her breath puffed like smoke from a pistol. Her boots crunched in rhythm, heartbeat in her ears. She didn't look back. The second hour brought the storm. Snow whipped sideways, slapping her face, blinding her. She pushed deeper into the woods off trail, unsure if she was heading down the mountain or circling it. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like wind catching branches. Then clearer. "Mama." She ignored it. "Don't leave me." She bit her lip until it bled. "Mama, it's cold." She stopped. The voice hadn't come from behind. It had come from inside her coat. She dropped the sack in a panic, tore it open. The doll sat inside, right atop the bread and lamp oil. Perfect, untouched, button eyes watching. "No," she breathed. "No, no." She flung it into the woods. It vanished into the snow. She slammed the bag shut and kept walking. But the next clearing she entered, it was there again. At the center. Waiting. Same doll, same stare. Only now its dress had changed. It wore her old Sunday dress, the one she'd brought from home, the one she hadn't seen since the first day. She screamed. But the wind swallowed the sound. She collapsed sometime near dawn beneath a rocky overhang, hands too numb to grip, lips cracked from wind. She tucked herself into the smallest space she could find, curling her knees to her chest. Sleep took her, or something like it. And then she dreamed. Not the forest, not the cabin, but a field of wildflowers, a sky of orange and lavender, and there, walking through it, was Wren. But not pale, not shadowed. Alive. Smiling. Whole. She knelt beside Ruth in the dream. "I'm not the mountain," she said, her voice soft. "It just uses me." Ruth blinked. "Then what are you?" "I'm stuck." "Why?" Wren looked down. "Because Papa broke the rules." "What rules?" "He didn't bury me." Ruth froze. "What do you mean?" Wren plucked a flower from the ground and crushed it gently in her fingers. "He thought if he didn't bury me, I'd come back." She looked up, eyes filled with something ancient. "So I never left, not fully." Ruth sat upright in the dream. "Where's your body?" Wren pointed. Then vanished. Ruth woke with a gasp. Snow had piled on her legs. But in front of her, scrawled in the snow by a child's hand, were two words. Creek Bend. She knew it. There was a spot, south of the cabin, where the trees split and the creek curved sharp around a black boulder. Wallace had once warned her not to wander near it, said the ice thinned there, said it was cursed ground. Now she understood why. Ruth rose and ran. The bend looked like any other, until she stepped close. The ground near the boulder was disturbed. Snow fell softer there, as if avoided. Roots twisted up from the earth unnaturally, like fingers reaching for something buried. Ruth dropped to her knees. She dug. First snow, then earth, then cloth. She uncovered a small bundle wrapped in wool. And when she peeled it back, bones. Tiny, fragile. And inside, nestled between them, the original doll, torn, dirty, burned on one side, not the one that haunted her. The real one. She knelt there in the snow, tears streaming down her face. Oh, Wren. Then came the wind. Furious, loud screaming. The forest bent inward, the shadows lengthened. And a voice, not Wren's, but older, deeper, filled the world. She was mine. Ruth rose slowly, holding the bundle close. No, she said, her voice strong now. She was his, and he failed her. The ground shook. Snow blasted sideways. You cannot take her. I'm not taking her, I'm freeing her. And with that, Ruth turned. She didn't run. She walked. Through the storm. Straight to the summit. The sky broke open as she climbed. Lightning cracked across the horizon, thunder rolling through the mountain like the growl of something waking. Snow turned to sleet, but Ruth didn't stop. She reached the summit before noon. And there she dug. A grave. By hand, with frozen fingers, with bleeding knuckles. And when it was done, she laid Wren to rest. She said the Lord's Prayer. She placed the real doll in the child's arms. And for a long moment, everything was still. Then, a sigh. Not hers. The mountain's. As if it had exhaled. The wind stopped. The sky cleared. And the shadows pulled back. Ruth looked down one last time. The bones had settled into peace. The earth seemed warmer now, softer. She buried her. This time for real. She returned to the cabin late that night. It was quiet, empty. But warm. No doll. No footprints. Only the fire glowing softly, as if grateful. She sat beside it, closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks slept. And in her dream, Wren stood in a field again. Smiling. Free. The fire cracked gently, low and golden, casting soft shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Ruth didn't stir. Her head had slumped against the rocking chair's back, her body finally at rest. For hours, sleep held her like a child. No dreams, no whispers, no dolls. Until the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, just a breeze curling under the doorframe. Then it thickened, cold as breath on a mirror. The flames dipped, the window fogged. And then Ruth's eyes opened. But not from a nightmare. From presence. She sat still in the chair, heart beating slow and deep. The cabin was as she'd left it, clean, quiet, peaceful. But there was something new in the air, an unfamiliar warmth mingled with the cold. It was the kind of stillness you hear at a church burial, sacred and final. She stood slowly and crossed to the window. Snow had fallen again, but softly now, like a quilt being laid gently over the mountain. The trees beyond the cabin shimmered silver under the rising moon. Not a single branch stirred. Then she noticed it. Just outside the window, in the snow. Tiny footprints. One pair. Leading from the woods to the porch, then stopping. Ruth froze. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt watched, yes, but not in the way she'd felt when Wren's voice had slithered through her ears like smoke. This was different. Curious. Mild. She opened the door. Outside, the snow muffled every sound. The footprints waited for her. She stepped into the cold barefoot, feeling its sting, accepting it. She followed the prints to the edge of the porch. And there, resting gently on the rail, was the old doll. The real one. Not the glowing-eyed mimic, not the one she'd buried. This was Wren's, the original, the threadbare arms, the singed cloth, the ribbon from Ruth's Sunday dress tied gently around its middle. She picked it up and looked around. No one. Just the silence of an ending. She brought the doll back inside and placed it on the mantel, not as a shrine, not out of fear, but because it belonged there, like a memory you don't want to erase. She stayed awake through the night, not because she was afraid, but because the cabin no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a home now, strange, hollow, but honest. She spent the following days cleaning it, removing Wallace's journals, burning the remnants of the symbols from the locked room, blessing the floorboards with prayers whispered through cracked lips and trembling faith. She rebuilt the grave markers out back too, not just for Wren, but for Wallace, and for all the other names that had never been written down but had been felt in the walls of that place. She didn't leave the mountain. She couldn't. Not yet. Because the story wasn't finished. And because Ruth had finally realized something that Wallace, in all his grief, had never been strong enough to accept. Wren had never needed her father to stay. She needed him to let go. And now, Ruth was the only one left to tell her goodbye. The townsfolk didn't come often up the Bitter Peak Trail. Most claimed it was cursed, haunted, unnatural. Even the trappers avoided it. But that winter, when the snow finally began to thaw, a traveling preacher passed through the edge of the range and saw smoke rising from a chimney. He went up, found the cabin clean, the animals fed, a woman living alone. She greeted him with a warm smile and a hot meal, offered him a stool by the fire. "Name's Ruth," she said plainly, "Ruth Langley." The preacher asked if she needed help, money, a place down in the valley. She shook her head. "No, sir, this mountain's my place now. Someone's got to watch over it." "Dangerous here, isn't it?" he asked. "Not anymore," she replied and stirred the stew. He stayed the night, and when he left the next morning, he stopped short on the trail. By the base of a crooked pine, half buried in the snow, he saw something strange. A child's footprint. Just one. And next to it, a tiny cross carved into the tree trunk. He didn't ask Ruth about it, didn't mention it at all. But when he returned to town, he told the others. That mountain's not cursed anymore. It's been forgiven. Weeks passed. Then months. Spring softened the ice, wildflowers burst between the cracks of stone, and birds returned to the trees. Ruth planted a garden, repaired the roof, mended her boots, and every night she lit the lamp on the porch and left it burning. Just in case. Just in hope. And sometimes, when the wind came from the east and the moon hung low over the tree line, she thought she heard laughter. Faint, like a child running through the trees. Not eerie, not haunting, but happy. She never went looking. She didn't need to. Some souls, once freed, don't need to stay. They just visit and say thank you. One morning, Ruth found something on her doorstep. A single braid of golden hair, tied in a knot. She smiled, held it to her heart, and whispered, "You're welcome." That summer, Ruth began writing. Not letters, not stories, but names. She carved them gently into the side of the porch, one for each person the mountain had taken: Wallace, Wren, Amos Langley, her mother, others whose names she'd come to know in dreams. She wasn't afraid of the dreams anymore. They weren't warnings now. They were visits, check-ins, whispers of thanks. The following winter, when the snow returned and the cold swept in, Ruth sat beside the fire once more. The dolls still rested on the mantel. The cabin was quiet, peaceful, safe. She closed her eyes. Not in fear, but in rest. She had carried the mountain's sorrow long enough. And for the first time in her life, she no longer felt alone. By the time the next spring reached Bitter Peak, Ruth Langley had not stepped off the mountain in nearly a year. She didn't need to. Word had trickled down to the valley town below, quiet rumors spoken in the corner of the church or over slow cups of coffee at the general store. Most folks still feared the trail, but they spoke of her with a kind of reverence now. Some called her the Watcher. Some said she'd tamed the mountain's curse. Others, more poetic, said she was its last wife, its final offering, but she had lived. None dared visit. They didn't need to. But sometimes, when dusk bled purple across the treetops and the fireflies blinked like stars scattered among the pines, travelers would swear they saw a lantern burning high up in the ridge. A steady light, a warm one, and if they listened close, a woman's voice humming a lullaby. Something old. Something kind. Something almost too soft to carry on the wind, yet somehow it did. Ruth didn't mark her days anymore. She measured time in the way the creek melted, in the first bloom of mountain asters, in the rhythm of snow drifting across the front porch. She rarely spoke aloud, only to herself, or the birds, or perhaps to something beyond the walls, something that had never quite left. She cooked, she wrote. She read the Bible aloud every morning the way her mother once had, her voice calm, clear, unwavering. And sometimes she dreamed. Always the same place, a field of tall grass, golden with sun, and the sound of a child laughing ahead of her. Wren. Not the ghost, not the mimic. Just the little girl Wallace had once known. Whole happy. Running ahead. Every time Ruth dreamed it, the field stretched a little farther, the wind grew warmer, and Wren's laughter sounded a little closer. One late summer morning, Ruth found something waiting by the garden gate. A rabbit, carefully placed, its body whole, not harmed, not trapped, wrapped in pine boughs and tied with a single thread of red. There were no footprints, no tracks, just the offering. She didn't touch it. She knelt beside it and whispered, "I don't need anything more." But when she opened her eyes, the bundle was gone. In its place, a single wildflower. Blue. Alive. The days passed gently, like songs sung too slowly to remember all the words. Sometimes Ruth would take long walks along the edge of the summit, not too close to the top, never foolish enough to tempt something she had already survived, but close enough to hear the wind breathe across the rocks. It no longer frightened her. That breath had changed. It was no longer hungry, no longer searching. It sighed like a mother watching her child sleep. Then one morning, Ruth didn't rise with the sun. The fire had gone out in the hearth. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove. The front door remained latched. But the lamp on the porch still burned. The last thing she'd written, carved into the post outside, was just 3 words. I let go. Inside, Ruth lay curled beneath the quilt she had stitched herself through a dozen quiet winters. Her Bible rested open on her chest. Her lips were soft, her eyes closed. She hadn't aged much. Her body looked peaceful. But her hands were folded the way a woman folds them when she's ready to rest. They didn't find her for weeks. A passing missionary, braver than most, had ventured up with a mule and a letter from a townswoman Ruth had once helped in secret. He knocked once, then again, then opened the door. He did not weep, he did not call out. He simply knelt and prayed. Then he buried her out back, beside the crosses she'd carved for Wallace and Wren, and the others she'd never explained. He added one more. No name, just a date, and beneath it, the mountain loved her. The seasons turned again. The cabin remained, weathered but strong. The garden grew wild. The doll stayed on the mantel, never moved, its eyes faded with sun, its threadbare body slumped peacefully. And on certain nights, when the wind curled low and soft, those who passed by swore they heard singing from inside. A woman's voice, a child's laugh, and the mountain, breathing like a great beast finally asleep. Epilogue years later. A girl named Marin, no older than 10, stood at the edge of Bitter Peak beside her father, eyes wide as the cabin came into view. They'd come up from the valley to escape a sickness that had swept through their town, hoping for shelter, not knowing the stories that still clung like moss to the trees. The door stood open. The air smelled of herbs and ash. Inside, everything was as it had been. A fire crackled, a pot simmered. No one in sight. But on the table, 2 mugs waited, and beside them, a bundle of dried wildflowers wrapped in blue thread. Marin sat near the fire. "It feels like someone's here," she whispered. Her father nodded. Maybe someone was. That night, as she drifted to sleep on the old straw mattress in the back room, she dreamed of a woman with long hair and a gentle smile, singing lullabies to a girl in a white dress. When she woke, a ribbon had been tied gently around her braid. She wore it home, and she never forgot the warmth of that quiet mountain cabin. Because some places are not haunted, they are healing. And some stories, they don't end in death. They end in peace. And in the name whispered softest by the wind, Ruth.